Good evening to, and this is the first session in room 13, and this session is about period crisis and social sciences, and we have two talks, one about the World War One, and the second is about the racism in Italy and a project about Jews and the net that helped Jews to come out to Italy during the fascism. So, please, Margot and Marie, you have the word for your presentation.
Thank you.
Tell us who are you and your presentation. We have 20 minutes for presentations and some minutes for the questions. In this session, we have time because you are just the presentation. So,
yes, ask many questions. No.
Go ahead. Should we sit?
Should we? Yes. Up on the room. Can we stand up or again? Thank you. So, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the opportunity you're giving us today to present the paper. We obviously want to thank you, thank the other organizer, the destination, the venue are beautiful, and we greatly appreciate the work you have done to put this together. So today we're going to focus on Belgium, and at the same time talk about internationalism in the social sciences. So this paper comes from some tentative hypotheses Margot and I have reached in our own work regarding the strategic, rhetorical, and performative use of internationalism in Belgian social sciences in the late 19th and early 20th century. We thought it would be fruitful to bring our ideas together to compare the case studies we have and highlight some common trends and assert even more firmly our assumptions. So that being said, this research is still at an exploratory level, so any feedback from all of you would be gratefully appreciated.
Thank you. So, as you certainly know, the First World War impacted the world politics powerfully. The political landscape of continental Europe was completely reconfigured at the end of the conflict, putting an end to the empires and inaugurating different political regimes in the 1920s. This political upheaval was accompanied by a major disruption of scientific life. Not only did the war prevent scientific activities, but it also created durable tension between the Allied and German scientists, whose country had long been the factory of modern science. This issue have been studied in literature for a long time now. In the early 1970s, historian Brigitte Schouder-Budehus started to write about international scientific organization, their structure, and how they were impacted by the war. This has paved the way to an important state-of-the-art surrounding internationalism in science, challenging the long-lasting belief that science is universal innately and therefore international in practice. The historical research on this topic has shown that even if intellectual practice were indeed embedded in a transnational background, where, for example, international structure and conference played a major role that has often been discarded, knowledge production was also infused with nationalist interests that could be more or less visible. In other words, these works demonstrated that science was a social activity among others with an ambivalent relationship to internationalism and nationalism.
So in the case of the social sciences, the pull toward internationalism was strong. Indeed, social scientists were particularly keen to promote the internationalism of their knowledge. Not only did they think it would prove that the social sciences were relevant, necessary, and desirable to society, but also that their international character would allow them to push the doors of scientific legitimacy, having been met with reluctance within the national institutions such as universities. In 1937, French sociologist and philosopher Célestin Bouguereau director of the École Normale Supérieure, the high-profile college for humanities in Paris, decided to organize a conference entitled Les Convergences des Sciences Sociales et de l'Esprit International, which is the convergences of the social sciences and the international mind, in which he said, and I quote, you can read it on the slide as well, "I write even for the Turks," said Descartes, and Pasteur reminded us that if the sciences has a homeland, science has none. It is time for the human sciences to come closer to this ideal, otherwise they will lose their character as science. End of quote.
So this legitimacy argument was also linked to an ideological one, because social scientists were also drawn to internationalism as an ideology that promotes rationality, peace, and freedom. This peculiar combination explained the eagerness of social scientists to foresee the social science as an international set of practices and knowledge. Dickmé, alias Eugène Weil, who founded several social science institutions in France, writes in 1900 in a report regarding the teaching of social science, and I quote, and you can also see the quote here, "Everything that calls itself social must above all be human, and everything that is human should be conceived or planned to be international." So in today's presentation, we want to highlight the trajectory of two specific Belgian social science institutions and question their ambivalent connection to internationalism and their attempt to go beyond the national level to better understand the nebula linking social science, internationalism, and universalism.
So Belgium is an interesting field study when it comes to the intersection of these issues. A small neutral country strategically situated between four giant neighbors, Belgium during the 19th century was very well connected to the rest of Europe, with a strong industrialization and the early development of train rails. As such, the country has welcomed international conferences and had been the headquarters of several international organizations, such as, but not only, the International Socialist Bureau. Despite its neutrality, in August 1914, German troops invaded Belgium. The destruction, for example, of the library of the University of Louvain at the end of August was a watershed moment that would be massively used to mobilize scientists within the war effort and feed the antagonism between Allied and German intellectuals.
So regarding the history of social science in Belgium, in the 1830s, Adolphe Quetelet published his first work on what he calls social physics. His early works were instrumental in establishing the International Association for the Progress of Social Science in Belgium. Also, a bit later, in 1889, École des Sciences Sociales was created at the University Libre de Bruxelles. So I will call it ULB for the rest of the presentation. And the ULB was at the time the main and only university in the capital. Nonetheless, the scope of this École des Sciences Sociales was restrained, only targeting already graduated students and for a complementary education. Moreover, it met a really limited success, with only a handful of students attending during the first years. So even though Belgium could appear to be a place where social science were valued, in fact, the field remained quite marginalized, as it was in other European countries. But this marginalization of social science led to a major crisis at the ULB in 1894, from which the two institutions were going to present emerged. Oops. Sorry. So, the first institution we're going to speak about is the Université Nouvelle de Bruxelles. So the crisis happening at the ULB in 1894 developed after the postponement of the upcoming lessons of the French geographer and non-anarchist Élisée Reclus. Consequently to the postponement of its lesson, Guillaume de Grève, the first international law sociologist in Belgium, resigned from his position as a teacher at the ULB, and he founded a new university, the Université Nouvelle, helped with by numerous Belgian socialist intellectuals. So the Université Nouvelle opened its doors in October 1894 with Élisée Reclus within the faculty. So in a nutshell, the founders of the Université Nouvelle were mostly socialist men, interested in the development of social science, and who felt that the administration of the ULB was too conservative and failed to provide an education adapted to the contemporary issues that society faced. As a response to this scientific hesitancy of the time regarding the developments of social science, the Université Nouvelle offered an innovative intellectual education with, for example, a doctorate in social science created in 1898.
So the second institution we are presenting is the Institut de Sociologie Solvay. So founded by Belgian industrialist Ernest Solvay, the Institut de Sociologie Solvay, which I will call ISS, opened its door in 1902. The ISS was not the first attempt, though, by Ernest Solvay to give the social sciences their own dedicated research institution. In 1894, the same year that the Université Nouvelle was created, Ernest Solvay established the Institut des Sciences Sociales. But the adventure did not last long. The three directors he chose for his institute, three major figures of Belgian socialism, including Guillaume Quetelet, were not as much aligned with his social thoughts, which rested on productivism, an ideology that encouraged the maximization of production has to enhance the standards of living of the whole society. In 1902, Ernest Solvay found a better match to assume the direction of the ISS. Emile Wechsler, who was trained as an engineer and developed a later interest in the social sciences, was chosen. He would remain at the head of the institute until his sudden death in 1916. The ISS was a private research institution that hosted intellectuals who were working on several issues related to the social sciences, so sociology in the name was broadly defined. Both institutions were instrumental in the institutionalization of the social sciences in Belgium, and both used internationalism, highlighting its importance at a specific moment in their histories, as we will see.
So for both institutions, 1894 was an important landmark. The crisis that took place at the ULB surrounding Élysée-Rue was not an isolated event. It emerged in the broader context of the raising of awareness about what had been called the social question. Everywhere in Europe, social unrest grew stronger. The postponement of work courses was a direct result of the anarchist attacks that happened in France during this period. A year earlier, Italian anarchist Santé de Ronigno-Caserio assassinated French President Sadi Carnot in Lyon. Later that year, the French socialists won the first electoral victory. They were followed by the Belgian colleagues of the Workers' Party of Belgium, who made the debut in the Legislative Assembly in 1894. Even outside Europe, across the ocean, the US was also shaken by the Pullman strike that hamstrung train traffic in Illinois and eventually led to the creation of the Socialist Party of America. In the early 1890s, anti-socialist laws were lifted in Germany, therefore allowing the Socialist Democratic Party to obtain seats in the Reichstag. The early 1890s, which showed the foundation of the two Belgian institutions we're speaking about, were then a moment when the Western world was shaken by the acuteness of social issues and when socialism as a political ideology saw its first success. So the social science and the promises began to be supported.
So this development of the social sciences parallel to that of socialism, or at least its early success, shaped a peculiar trajectory for their institutionalization. It is precisely partly by distinguishing social sciences and socialism that Ernest Solvay could bring some attention to his institute. Even though Emile Wechsler was part of the progressivist wing of the Liberal Party in Belgium, just as Ernest Solvay, he remains part of the Belgian elite, trained as an engineer and particularly interested in the high-wage policy of the United States. His approach to social sciences was therefore opposite to the more radical stances that existed with socialism. And during the Wechsler years, the ISS remained more focused on the national level, Of course, this does not exclude any international interactions. Those were even instrumental in establishing the social sciences as proper science, as we have highlighted in the introduction. But the internationalism displayed by the ISS was not a major piece of its development during those years.
So the relationship between socialism was also a determining factor for the evolution of the University Nouvelle. At its foundation, the links between the Belgian socialism and the new university were apparent. However, as the institution tried to shape itself, this connection became quite ambivalent. To be perceived as a legitimate institution, the main protagonists of the Université Nouvelle were very prudent as to never qualify their university as a socialist institution, despite their numerous links to the Belgian Workers' Party. Nevertheless, it was a miss. The Belgian authorities considered the Université Nouvelle only as a rioter led by socialists and consequently denied the validity of its diplomas on Belgian grounds. As a result, Belgian students fled the Université Nouvelle, which underwent a profound restructuration around 1899 to fully blossom as an international university, targeting only foreign students and promoting exchange with European sociologists. But a few years later, the First World War put the Université Nouvelle in a very uncomfortable situation. After the flames of Louvain, the majority of scientific societies in Belgium, and as such every university, closed. But it was not the case for the Université Nouvelle. They remained open during the the 4 years of the war. According to its rector, Guillaume de Greve, war was a state matter and did not concern the people. Moreover, numerous foreign students were stuck on Belgian territory at the beginning of the war and wanted to pursue their education. However, in September 1915, most of the foreign students were gone, and the Université Nouvelle wanted now to provide the Belgian youth with the necessary intellectual occupation. In other words, for the first time in years, the Université Nouvelle was again a Belgian institution interacting with Belgian students. But when the war ended, the future of the Université Nouvelle was quite undecided. Numerous professors left the institution during the war because they were unhappy about the decision to remain open. Other professors, such as the socialist Emile van der Velde, became members of the Belgian government, whereas the pacifist Henri Lafontaine focused his effort on the new League of Nations. In a time of post-war national cohesion in Belgium, with a government composed of the three political parties in Belgium, Catholic, Liberal, and for the first time, Socialist, the idea of two universities in Brussels lost its sense. As a result, the Université Nouvelle closed in 1919 and partially merged back with the ULIC.
For the ISS, the outbreak of the Great War created new opportunities on an international level. So in 1916, Emile Vaxveller died unexpectedly in London due to a traffic accident. And after a period of indecision, Ernest Solvay decided to nominate two of his good friends and admirers to the head of the institution, Georges Barnic, a former physician, and Georges Quetelet, a chemist and a physicist, so both of whom had no experience or knowledge in the field of the social sciences. After the war, nonetheless, an unexpected opportunity was presented to the ISS. The Internalized Reparation Commission offered them to produce study and to help organize their intelligence service. This offer proved that the ISS acquired a notable reputation during its first years of existence. However, the inexperience of the duo of directors, so Barnic and Quetelet, was soon made visible, and in a context where the reparations negotiations deteriorated, their consultant's position was terminated, leaving the ISS in a form of disgrace. To make things even more uncertain, Ernest Solvay died in 1922, leaving the ISS in crisis again. First, the Solvay heirs came up with a solution that would at the same time ensure the prestige of the institute while allowing it to be held in respect back, I would say, in the international spheres. They offered to give it with a substantial amount of money to the newly created League of Nations. However, this proposal created some embarrassments for the League's officials who felt that they were being given a poison gift, which they finally declined. And interestingly, the Solvay made once again the decision to distance themselves and the Institute from socialism and any left-wing movements. Indeed, at the same time, Adolphe, who was the director of the also newly established International Labour Bureau, close to the Durkheimian circles in France, the Socialists, offered to tie a closer collaboration between the International Labour Bureau and the ISS. On paper, this would have been completely aligned with the will of the heirs to associate the Institute with an international organization. However, the Solvay heirs decided to go back to Belgium and to negotiate with the ULB authorities. So, Barnick and Solvay were finally removed from the direction of the Institute, and a professor from Liège, Ernest, an economist and sociologist, was designated as its new director in 1923. And so this closed the saga of the ISS, which after 7 years of some crisis and its international endeavors returned, just like did the Université Nouvelle, to its Brussels stage and its main intellectual institution, the ULB.
So, as a conclusion, this short exposition of the trajectories of two Belgian institutions has highlighted several trends regarding the links between social science, research, and internationalism in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, and the impact the Great War has had, or not, on this connection. What is striking in the parallels between these two institutions is how the Great War, while causing huge disruption, of course, did not completely unsettle specific practices and attitudes toward internationalism. Indeed, while going through an institutional crisis, the ISS deployed the same strategy regarding internationalism that the Université Nouvelle did 20 years earlier. If no one is a prophet in their own land, then it is necessary to cross the border to get access to or to regain prestige, recognition, and legitimacy that were inaccessible in the homeland. The Université Nouvelle could not be recognized as a proper higher education institution in Belgium, and therefore decided to truly become a European university. Ernest Solvay has trouble recruiting a competent staff for the direction of his institute in Belgium. Then its prestige will be recovered through recognition by international organizations.
What remained also quite visible before and after the Great War was the ambivalent attitude of the protagonists of the social sciences, sponsors but researchers as well, regarding socialism. Even after the First World War, as socialists entered the Belgian national government, the willingness to hold distance toward the political ideology that aimed to solve the social question was still very visible. It was a matter of building legitimacy and staying clear of ideological content, while also being a pragmatic move from Solvay, for example, in order to promote his own liberal ideas.
Our presentation has also highlighted the persistent lack of legitimacy that social sciences institutions faced before and after the war. In 1918, both institutions' futures were undetermined, and new strategies were needed to survive. Whereas the Université Nouvelle chose to close, not finding its place in the new post-war society, the ISS managed successfully to take a turn, associating itself with emerging international institutions and engaging in the new field of expertise. Even if the ISS, as Marie has told you, even if this trajectory of the ISS was far more peaceful in the 20s, the ISS still exists today, whereas the Université Nouvelle has been closed for more than 100 years. So this brief presentation aimed to offer a convincing argument for a more transnational approach to scientific institutions. Our analysis did not erase the national level. To the contrary, we tried to show how capturing the attention of the national officials has guided the protagonists we have studied. But their attachment to this nationality is more complex when one takes into consideration their awareness of international structure and their interaction with them.
So finally, and we're going to end here, the strategic use of internationalism, both in rhetoric and in practices, emphasizes the fact that internationalism is not a natural feature of scientific discourses, but rather a construction. And this construction is the result of a dynamic process of co-creation, emerging from different protagonists and combining rhetoric, ideologies, and practices. In that way, we can say that internationalism is not a context that frames science, but rather one of the products of scientific activity itself. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for your interesting presentation. And I think that all over the Europe, the continental Europe, we have before World War I a progressive culture and progressive governments in Italy, in France, and after World War I we have more conservative nationalism, and the nationalism in Italy in particular, you know, and after the fascism. And this is the crisis. And the crisis periods. Maybe social sciences. There are social sciences before the World War I, and social sciences after. Also psychology before and after. Maybe. What do you think about them?
Yes, that's. With the presentation, we had no preconceived idea of what we wanted to say, so we really speak each other about the institution we were working on, and we thought that the Great War would have more impact on a lot of things, and actually we discovered a lot of continuities within the strategic internationalism of the institution. But there is still, of course, a disruption. In the case of Belgium, it's not really a conservative government. Just after the war, as I said, the Socialists entered the government for the first time. So it's kind of the acceptance of one movement, and also the right of vote became universal, meaning without women, but still after the first war. So you have like a step towards a new ideal still, and when social scientists can be perceived as having a real expertise on the matter. So of course you have a new political stance after the war, and you have to know international structure, you have to associate yourself with it to have an expertise, which the ISS does and the International doesn't, and one is not here today and the other is. So, but there were still continuities towards the necessity to associate itself with internationalism to exist. I don't know if you.
No, just to say that, of course, even though we highlighted the continuities, like saying that social science institutions were still struggling to find an institutional position within higher education institutions, actually, in Europe, the professionalization of social sciences was going on, so there were even more books written in this field, and people were more and more connected. So of course this created a new atmosphere, and this is also this is also what is under the story of the falling in disgrace of the two directors of the ISS. So at the beginning of the 20th century, you could put a physicist and a physician to be directors of that kind of institution. In 1920s, that was no more possible because their lack of knowledge would be very highlighted, which was the case.
Okay. Some question?
Maybe not so much a question, it's kind of a comparative comment. In the United States, certainly World War I did have an influence. So, for example, maybe many so-called progressive intellectuals who were pro-war participated in Woodrow Wilson's administration, and they did things like gather statistics, statistical methodologies became more important. The whole idea that you can have some sort of social planning, that you can plan a world war, for example, as the Americans did, and people, of course, in other nations did as well. That became more and more kind of prominent issue. Also interdisciplinarity, the idea that these very specialists should work together. So you have the Social Science Research Council, for example, being formed in 1923 in the aftermath of the war, but maybe even more significantly, the Rockefeller and Rockefeller Memorial Program. Two people ran it very directly, Beardsley Hummel and Lawrence Frank were people who participated in the war effort. I mean, you know, they got a lot of they were progressive, so-called progressive, and not socialists. I mean, you know, they're not. Rockefeller still like socialists.
Maybe we can have another
Yeah,
question
definitely.
from Daniel.
Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much. I know greatly about Belgium and even less about sociology. But my question is about internationalization, because after the First World War, yeah, of course, there was big problem for internationalization was that two huge countries were excluded by internationalization, that were Germany and Soviet Union. That was the reason Germany was excluded from the International Union of Pure and Applied Physics and the International Union of Pure and Applied Chemistry. How can we do physics without the Germans? Like, I don't know, having a soccer world champion without Brazil. So, and that was a consequence precisely of all cycle during the First World War, the great politics about the German sides, mainly from the French. So, what happened in sociology of Belgium? So, this internationalization evolved considering the impact of German scholarship on sociology. So how they manage this internationalization, maybe through other channels, I don't know, pooling ties with the Anglo-Saxon world.
Yes, so regarding the US social sciences, of course, I agree with everything. I mean, yes, but what is interesting is that even though there was a war experience and even an intellectual mobilization of scientists in the United States, but it's not the experience of, I mean, the experience of World War I was not the same in Europe as it was in the United States, because it did not happen on US soil. And even though, I mean, the impact of the war was more important, I would say, in the US, but where the social sciences had a very different position, institutional position that they had in Europe. So it's not really about the war and the shock it created. It's more about how the government reacted and how it appealed, and how it tried to integrate its social sciences to its reflection on organizing society, which is, I think, very interesting. And regarding the exclusion of Germany and the Soviet Union. So first of all, the Soviet Union was not immediately excluded, and the ties continued to happen. I mean, the connection was still there from in the early 20s. It's more in the late 20s that the Soviet Union was completely excluded in almost every international conferences, in almost every disciplines. And regarding Germany, yes, basically, books were still read, and even though scientists were not invited to conferences, especially in France and Belgium, of course, the relationship with German scientists resumed with English-speaking scientists, and they resumed very quickly. For example, between the American scientists and the German scientists, and I would say that around 1926 it resumed as well with French and Belgian social scientists. So this was this was a founding moment because this was the first time we were excluding scientists we found were even more intense at the time, but at the same time it was a very short period, and it did not break all the contacts and connections social scientists from Europe had with the German social scientists.
Yeah, if I can add on that, from the perspective of the Université Nouvelle, the relationship with Germany, or more or less with Russia, it's quite an interesting one, because the majority of the students of the Université Nouvelle were foreigners, but especially coming from the Russian Empire. Is it? Yeah. Yes, sorry. So the majority of the foreign students of the Université Nouvelle came from the Russia Empire at the time, but then also Bulgaria, stuff like that. And Bulgaria entered the war with the Germans, so it was a complicated situation as well. And it's one of the reasons why they closed, because they didn't think the foreign student could come as easily as before the war to the university. And they had mostly Bulgarian students, and Bulgarian students were not really welcome anymore in Belgium, at least during the first year after the war. So you could see it had impact, but it's difficult to... Yeah, it had impact. On the University level, it had impact, and also on the socialists, because there were a lot of socialists involved in the University level, and there was a lot of debate. Emil van der Velde, who was one of the founders, and who became the first member of government in Belgium, being a socialist, was really against trying to have close relationship with Germany just after the war within the socialist networks. And he was president of the Socialist Internationalist Bureau, so it was conflict because you're supposed to represent the internationalism of socialism, and you're putting forward your national point of view on Belgium being political Belgium, and so he had, of course, been debates in the years following the war, and I do think, again, from the perspective of Ernest, as a lot of the socialists that were involved in that became now member of the national authorities, and they were maybe a bit shocked about what happened during the war, and they looked towards the nation, and the Université Nouvelle and its international stance with Bulgarian students was not a priority anymore. So, as Mary said, obviously, with the years coming, this kind of go back together, but really for the year just after the war, it had an impact, and I think it's one of the reasons why the University Nouvelle couldn't last anymore. It had no more sense for the people.
Okay, thank you.
So
I don't see.
Thank you for that, and I share your interest in the proceedings of international conferences. I worked mostly before the war, but one of the things that strikes me about them is the fragility of the project, and how often the effort to make something appear to be a transnational conversation is disrupted by the divergence of the papers and the lack of shared assumptions and other kinds of things. So, and I wonder if some of that persists after the war as well. And the other thing that strikes me about some of those early proceedings is the different stakes for scientists located in different national scientific communities, that particularly at the margins of Europe, and I work mostly on Italian social sciences, the need to be taken seriously is different than it is for the French, and for example. So I don't know how that plays out with Belgium, but I think it's interesting to think about who benefits and how people benefit differently from being a part of an international community at that time.
Yes. So I'm working really as before the war, so because I'm working on the University Nouvelle as maybe and it's closed in 1919, so maybe I will leave the part of after the war to Marie if you have any inspiration. But regarding the need, Belgium nationalism has a really strange place because it's kind of a new country, independence in 1830. And it was this neutral small country between empires, and so the idea was we are the international country. So you define the nationality of your place, by its closeness to other nations and the interaction it can have across Europe. And then you promote the idea of international association are welcome in Brussels. We have a liberal government, and so we value free speech. A lot of left-wing thinkers, as Proudhon, Marx, came to Brussels looking for a place to be, and Élysée Rebeu as well, the one I was thinking about. So the connection, that's why Belgium is also an interesting field of studies, because the connection, as it is a marginal small country, stuck within giants, it has to promote the international factor of the country welcoming everybody. And I still think it's relevant today with being the capital of Europe, obviously.
Regarding the fragility of a project within this, who fostered this international spirit after the war, actually, when we agree on the fact that internationalism, even in science, is a construction and therefore a product, it fits everywhere. It just fits in every background and in every context, and that's what I said about the exclusion of German. It did not impact internationalism as it was conceived in the head of Belgians or French people or scientists, because internationalism is a way of thinking things, and the exclusion of a major nation of science did not prevent internationalism to still blossom in that sense. And it was true for other institutions, international institutions in the 1920s. For example, the League of Nations is also still considered today as a failure in historiography, but at the same time, it created so many opportunities and so many congresses and assemblies that were very important and relevant in the development of international politics, but also social sciences. So yes, internationalism goes everywhere. It can be regarding the condition it's not. That's important. Quick one.
Yeah, it's longer because you call the story of the university movement as kind of obviously like institutionally as one of failure because they were kind of national university. But if you look at the biographies of the important people involved, actually it can also be a story of success though, because they become like ministers, they like work in innovations. So kind of they actually then keep working on an international scene, and they kind of, in a sense, maybe do or do not put into action the idea of like the spirit of learning that they kind of fostered in the universities. So I think.
Yeah, the question of the University of was it a success or not? Actually, I do think that the project had a sense for a lot of the protagonists in the early years as a quest of legitimacy, as we speak about. It was difficult to be a social scientist or proto-social scientist at the end of the 19th century in Belgium. So having kind of place developing in Brussels was an interesting idea. But then when it didn't really impact the Belgian society because it was targeting foreign students, and so in that sense it's the first failure. And so the main protagonist who could find something more important to do, and as it's like going into international institution or going back to the ULB maybe, or becoming members of government, really they did not really care about this project anymore, and that's the war where it's really you can see that now there are more important things and professions to go about, and so it becomes like an afterthought, and so we can applaud it. So I don't know if that proved it's a success because the member on it were able to build up a career afterwards, or it's proved that I think they built the careers outside of the Université Nouvelle, and the ones that stayed really inside the Université Nouvelle, as Guillaume de Clèves, is not a well-known sociologist anymore. He's not Durkheim, he's not Max Weber, he has been quite forgotten, and I think it has to be connected with the fact that he was mainly director of an institution that lasts 25 years in Brussels, and an institution that is not really known anymore. And the one that escaped early and that have other interests outside the Université Nouvelle managed to have a more successful career after it. So, of course, I will not say in my PhD that it's a whole failure, but I do feel like at the end it failed what I wanted to do.
Thank you.
Thank you.